Yeah, well, I was trying to be mindful and patient, and I can't at the moment come up with specific examples, but I'm very much aware that there's times where my own impatience and predispositions start to carry me away, and so I was trying to be very mindful to give space for that, so that I could just react more calmly and appropriately over the course of the weekend. Again, I can't think at the moment of any specific cases, but there were lots of them.
Yeah, so that's very good. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead.
I'm very grateful to be here. I'm a new person. I've had a background in Christianity, and so I feel this is so beneficial for me to even get clarity about my own faith and how to practice it on a momentary basis. And I guess that's what you gave me last week, was that ability to hold back 1 second and look at it a new way. And
Yes.
I just want to thank you for that.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think last week we discussed about training our mind, and one step we discussed was that the first step to really train our mind is to spy the workings of our mind. We just need to be spy on ourselves, how our mind works. So normally we don't really observe when whatever, when what you call what is that term now? Anyway, when we encounter any situation, we just react. That's what we said about. It is all about responding, not reacting. So we need to create this, what is called emotional gap. So far we are so habituated in reacting. When there's a stimuli, we just react. When somebody says something else, react. When we see something else, we quickly make a judgment, and then we act on it. But if we sort of step back and see how this works, that's where we talk about we have to identify the real enemy, which is within us. It's all our mental afflictions. These are the real enemies. There is nothing, our external things, even though we perceive them as our enemy, but the real enemy is within us. So in order to identify that, we really need to sit back and think, how does these mental afflictive emotions really give rise to all that suffering and pain and discomfort? So that's the first step. We need to create that gap. And obviously you have been trying. So that's very good. I'm happy that you are really trying to do something about it. That's very good. Of course, as sorry, I forgot your name.
Ken.
Ken. We're two Kens. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So forgive me if I don't remember your name. I'm very bad with names, remembering names. Yeah. So as you mentioned, we are habituated. So habituated in reacting. So it will take time. It is not something, that, okay, I want to do it today, and then, you expect the result immediately. That's not it. That's not going to happen. You have to consistently practice. That's why we said that mental training is akin to going to gym, bodybuilding. You have to continuously, persistently go day after day. Only then you will see some result. If you just do one twice, 3 times, and then if you expect some result, no. That you must tell yourself that this is not something you can expect to have result instantly. That's not going to happen. But there will be a gradual progress. That you can assure yourself. So that's very good. I'm happy that you have been trying to integrate what we learn in our class. That's most important. Many of us, from me including myself, we read, we attend teachings, we hear, and then we just leave everything there. Especially mornings we do prayer. We spend hours in our prayer hall, prayer room. And we do a lot of practices there. And just we leave everything with our cushion. Then we just go alone. There's no practice. So that's not the way to do. We have to try every now and then. And as Ken mentioned about being mindful, that is the way. Anyway, we will discuss more next week on this practice. But today our topic is the precious human rebirth and how to live a meaningful life. So I want to start with living a meaningful life before we go into the precious human rebirth. I feel that we can use the understanding of precious human rebirth for us to facilitate or to help us live a meaningful life. So the first question is, what is a meaningful life? This is very subjective. Psychology, it's especially positive psychology, it is one of the big components of positive psychology. They talk a lot about living a meaningful life. So it's actually, the question is about what matters to me, what is important to me. So if you find that important, then of course you may be able to find meaning. So that's what psychology would say. We will discuss whether that is true from the Buddhist perspective. So what do you think? Living a meaningful, do you have any kind of example of a person, who you think that, lived a meaningful life?
I'll suggest someone who I disagree with, who just died, John McCain, who lived a life of public service and was very true to a set of principles and had a desire to serve people, particularly people in this country, but to do so in a way that was fair and open and was willing to talk and listen as well. And I think that he did that up to the very end, past the point where he could even spend his time in Washington. He did that from his home in Arizona to the day he died. So I think that was a meaningful use of a life. It was a life of service.
Okay, so it looks like the defining in his life as meaningful life is his service to others.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, so this is very subjective. For some people, pursuing material gains can be, they perceive that as meaningful. And some spending time with your family, that's a meaningful thing. For some just, maybe over here is common, I don't know. Working from Monday to Friday and then having barbecue on Saturday. Maybe that's I don't know. Maybe that is a meaningful life. So anyway, in psychology, there is so much emphasis on this meaning in life. So that's why Viktor Frankl, I think most of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl, who spent years in Nazi concentration camp, Auschwitz, yeah. And he wrote this famous book, The Man's Search for Meaning. Auschwitz, yeah. So he quoted this in his book. I think many times he quoted that, and he based most of his book on this. So he says, this is a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. So he says, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any harm. So if you have a meaning to live for, then whatever challenges come by your way, you will be able to
Well,
face
it's
it.
the same as McCain, you know, McCain that was reading in this morning in the
Mm.
paper is that what
Mm.
sustained him, he was like prisoner of war like for 5 years or 6 years, I forget,
Mm.
but what sustained him is that he was gonna get everyone else out, not just him.
Mm.
And so that sustained him to,
Yes, yes.
you know, for others, and it kept him,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
um,
So we can see
alive,
that
yeah.
if you have a meaning in your life, then yeah, you will be able to face any challenges. And some say that it is like having meaning is like having an armor to face any adversity. You will be able to face. And there is a lot of research on meaning in life, and then of course happiness. And one of them is that those who are high on meaning, those who score high on meaning, tend to have what is called positive affect, positive emotion. So when you have this feeling of positive emotion, of course you will be happy all the time. If you are feeling positive all the time, then there's no reason that you will be sad and all that. So the research shows that those who have meaning in life tend to score high on positive emotions. And also those who have meaning in life tend to have lower stress, better immune functions, lower cardiovascular risk. These actually, yeah, you don't have to do research actually. Of course, scientific approach is that, yes, we must see objectively, we must have data. You cannot just hypothesize. You must kind of have the evidence to support your hypothesis. So this, of course, is a common sense. If you are feeling all the time positive, then of course, there won't be stress. You won't feel stress about it. And then, of course, because no stress, there's better immune and all this. And another is that if you have meaning in life, those who score high in meaning tend to have what you call the higher hope. And they actually, this is more like they said, I think the research more like experimental. Meaning in life tend to increase hope in people. So Viktor Frankl, in his book, he related an account that from his own observation. During the Christmas and New Year time, many prisoners die. So he theorized that this is because that until then, people have hope. People have been hoping that, oh, I will be able to spend Christmas and New Year with my family next year. So that hope really kept people survive, people to move on, people to go, people to live. And then when the Christmas draws nearer, then yeah, they think, oh, that's not going to happen. And then they give up, they lose hope. And that's why there is the number of death rises during that period. So it's like you have no meaning to live now. You thought that if you live, to spend your time with your family, that's your meaning in life. But now that's not happening. So in psychology, there's a term called existential vacuum. So when you do not have meaning, when you fail to have meaning in your life, then you tend to feel this existential vacuum. There's this feeling of emptiness, feeling of loneliness, or sense of desolation. That's when you go for drugs. Just to fill that gap, you look out for something else to fill this vacuum. And that's where people become alcoholic, get addicted to drugs. So that is why to have meaning in life is very important. But then the question is, what is meaning of life? We have discussed a little bit. So some people, the pursuit of extrinsic goal, chasing after money, chasing after status, chasing after fame, popularity, whatever. So people see meaning in that, and that's why they devote all the time and energy in achieving that. But we have discussed in the first class that in terms of happiness, that's not really the factor that guarantees happiness. And then there is another view. This is a motivational theory. So it says that if you are able to fulfill the three basic psychological needs, then you have meaning in life. So the needs are the autonomy, the need for autonomy. We want to feel independent. We want to feel that we have control of our environment. We want to feel that we have choice. And then competence, mastery over things. And then relatedness, that is, in a sense of belonging. So this motivational theories view is that if you are able to fulfill these three basic needs, then you will have this sense of satisfaction, and that's where you get, you feel, you perceive that your life has a meaning. That's one view. And then this is another model. It's called, they say that the meaning has, meaning consists of these four components or four elements. First, you need to have the purpose. That is more like a motivation aspect. And then understanding, that is a cognitive aspect. Understanding, first they say that you need to understand who you are. If you understand who you are, you will be able to know what your value and belief systems are, what kind of values and belief systems you subscribe to. Then, once having this understanding of your beliefs and value, then you can choose to do something that corresponds, that aligns with your belief system or value system. And then this is the behavioral aspect, responsible action. You cannot simply do anything, but they need to have a moral component. You have to do something that is right and not harmful to others. And then the evaluation. Evaluation is the one that makes you feel that you have the meaning. So after going through all this, so you evaluate, what am I doing? What I have been doing, is it meaningful? So you evaluate, and then you get this sense of satisfaction. And that gives the sense of having meaning in your life. So from all this, you can see that it all boils down to our fundamental aspiration, happiness, satisfaction, sense of satisfaction. So when you have this sense of satisfaction, I'm doing well, I am happy, then you feel like, oh, my life has meaning. So that's true. When life is going well, when everything is going well in our life, we feel that, oh, there is meaning. But when we are faced with challenges, then we think that, oh, my life has no meaning, and then this and that. So what I'm trying to point here is, in psychology, even though they use different terms, but my interpretation is it all boils down to happiness. And that's what His Holiness is. The true meaning of life. We are visitors on this planet. We are here for 90 or 100 years at the very most. During that period, we must try to do something good, something useful with our lives. if you contribute to other people's happiness, you will find the true goal, the true meaning of life. So from this, we can see that His Holiness is saying that if we are able to contribute to others' happiness, then that is the true meaning of life. But then how that relates to happiness, His Holiness explains. Oops, no sound system.
Can you click on the speaker icon on the right? Click on the right, just to the right of where the cursor is, just a little further right.
Extreme right.
Lower right corner, the little speaker.
Sorry, speaker.
Move the cursor right there.
Yeah.
Well, it's on.
It is on.
Okay, so
Well, it
Maybe
doesn't
what I have
have
to
to
do
be.
is here. I
Yeah.
think I know.
yeah, there's also there may be a yeah, there you
Go to the setting. It is connected.
go. Okay. Look, you've got your
This one,
volume
isn't
on.
it? It is connected.
No, that's all right. In the bottom.
It's muted, yeah.
No, it's not muted.
No,
It's not muted.
Yeah, if I click this, then it becomes muted.
no.
It's not muted. Hmm.
Well,
Right
it
now
looks
it
like
should-
it's all,
yeah.
it's all
Looks like
gone.
it's muted now. There's a little, yeah, it's muted. Why don't you click?
On your computer, maybe?
Yeah.
Hmm. Anybody
Yeah.
familiar with this? I don't know. Who?
All right, try clicking on the mute and unmute button on that.
This one?
Yeah, click on it.
Nothing happens.
Click again. It's not showing. Let you do that.
Hmm.
That's okay. That's not the problem. I don't think.
We are not using Apple TV. This is the HD.
That's what you. Yeah, that's fine.
Hmm.
Your remote for the TV.
Uh-oh.
Oh, does the TV have its own volume?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
maybe
maybe the remote control is somewhere there.
it's on the, it's positive, it's positive going up.
Okay.
Oh, you,
Here.
I think Anthony would know.
Good, Anthony.
Whoops! I just took us off of.
Just go on menu.
I
Give it
screwed it up.
Go on
give it to
the middle menus, there, and go to HD12. That's the middle button on the top.
Yeah.
There, you got it,
Okay, got that back.
Okay, and the volume is just the, is
The plus and
yeah,
minus?
right, yep.
There we go. That's gonna be pretty loud. Turn it down some. Okay.
Affection or compassionate attitude, warm-heartedness, is very, very important for one's own well-being, for one's own happiness. So don't consider practice of compassion is something religious matter, or practice of compassion is something good for other, not necessarily to oneself. That's a totally mistake. So, since from childhood we already equipped this seed of compassion, we learned from mother and ourselves in order to become parent, the seed already there. Now that seed we must keep nurtured whole our life. The biological factor compassion is limited, biased, and more depend on others' attitude. Now that as a seed, then using reasons, awareness, that seed, compassion, can further develop unbiased compassion, not based on, not depend on others' attitude, but rather others' being itself. So that kind of compassion can reach your enemy or entire sentient being. So that compassion is infinite compassion, unbiased compassion, real compassion. So, if we become compassionate person, then your life becomes meaningful. Because you yourself happy, calm, peaceful, your friend, or including animals, also is at peace. So at the last day of our life, you feel happy. Now, all my life I've spent peaceful, friendly, and you really feel happy. Otherwise, at that moment, even you're a billionaire, those money, nothing can be used. No matter what's the good, because of the good body, or beautiful body, all everything have to, because we have to live. So at that time, I think genuine satisfaction can bring, if your whole life spent more compassionate life, then you feel, oh, no regret. So, purpose of life is naturally happy life, meaningful life. So in order to make meaningful life, ultimately, Om-heartedness is the key factor.
So His Holiness explains why compassion is the key factor to finding meaning in life. So there's a relationship between your own happiness and the compassion. His Holiness explains that when you have this genuine compassion towards others, then not only it makes others happy, but it also brings happiness to yourself and your family. So it boils down to one's own happiness. So happiness, there are different levels. We can discuss this later, but I just wanted to elaborate on this, what His Holiness mentioned. So compassion, yeah, I subscribe to that. If you live a compassionate life, then your life is really, really meaningful. And as His Holiness says that, it will bring infinite happiness. And that's true, because when you really have a genuine compassion for others, your source of happiness, I don't know whether I've told you before, your source of happiness becomes infinite. Because the compassion is really this genuine wish for others to be happy. And in order to have that, of course, there is loving compassion as well.
Loving kindness?
Loving kindness, yes, loving kindness. So loving kindness is wishing all the good things or happiness and causes for others. And compassion is wishing for others to be free of suffering and its causes. So when you have these two together, when you really have this, at the moment, as His Holiness says, it's biological. Or this compassion is biological compassion, which is only spotlighted on certain number of people, just my family. Or maybe I can include some of my friends. That's all you care about. When good things happen to these small number of people, you feel happy. When good things happen to people beyond that inner circle, you don't feel anything. But sometimes we feel jealous, unhappiness, especially if you're working in a big company, your colleagues, when somebody else gets a promotion which you are looking for and you didn't get it, you are not happy. You become jealous. But when you have real compassion for everyone, so your colleagues get promotion, you are so happy. When something good happens to a stranger, so happy. You walk to the town and something good happening there, so happy. So you can see that the source of happiness is not limited to a certain number of people. It's infinite. And then that way, if you really have that kind of attitude towards others, wherever you go, you don't feel that you are alien to others. You feel like you are going to a friend's place. Everybody, you have this soft, close feeling towards everyone. You will feel at home. So this is very important. And then from the stress point of view, there's a stress model. So how we get stress? They say that we need to have certain level of stress. If you don't have stress at all, then we become lethargic, and we don't want to do anything. Inertia, is it? Is there such word?
Yes.
Inertia.
Inertia.
Inertia, yeah. You don't want to move at all. So that's where depression may become, you don't want to move anything. We need to have certain level of stress. So that optimum level of stress is called eustress.
Yeah.
But when that exits the required, then it becomes distress. So how eustress becomes distress is all about appraisal. Appraisal of the situation. Let's say if you have a work, there's a job. If you appraise that job as chore, that I have no choice what to do, then there's distress. Then it becomes stress. Whereas if you appraise that, if you perceive that as something challenging, that wanting to do, there's a lot of incentives that you feel internally, then you don't see that as a the chore or anything. So there's no stress. So that's why when we go to work, whatever we are doing, we are actually, in one way or another, we are benefiting others. We are helping some person. So in that way, if you are able to go with this intention, may I be able to help others, benefit others. If that kind of intention, if you go to work, there's no reason to feel stress. At the end of the day, you feel so happy. You will rejoice in your work. So that's why I really always believe that those who are in helping career, like nurses, doctors, who else, counselors, all this, I feel that really, really fortunate to have that kind of job. Because while doing that job, of course, you get paid. But also you get to practice. From the morning, if you really go, generate this compassion, bodhicitta, whatever compassion, and then you go to work and help people. It is so satisfying, so fulfilling. You don't feel it as, work. So when you come back home and you lie in your bed, okay, today I have helped this. So instead of, tomorrow you are dreading to go to job, you will look forward to it. So that's the power of compassion. Of course, in Shanti there was text we talk about, compassion is like the elixir.
Elixir?
Elixir. Yeah, it's the portion that can convert or transform metal into gold. Once you have that thing, even though you are ordinary and whatever, but the minute you have compassion, you becomes the sons of Buddha. Certainly, you become the refuge. So, taking this into these are a kind of religious point of view. You need to have some faith to really buy into that. But from your own, from the common sense that I explained about having this infinite number of friends, infinite source of happiness. So why don't we do that? So that's why His Holiness is saying that this is where. So if you live that way your whole life, imagine when you are on your deathbed, definitely there is no regret. Many people die with a list of regrets, what is called unfinished business. Oh, I should have done this, should have done that, I shouldn't have done this, all this. So it's in a way, it's very easy, isn't it, to find a meaning in life. You just follow His Holiness. And then, I wanted to show you another research finding, which is extraordinary for many reasons. This is something different research. Normally, most of the research are cross-sectional. You just do one, take your participants and do that, that's it. But this is a longitudinal study. Normally longitudinal, maybe 10 years, 15 years. This is like many years. So it's very interesting. And after you finish it, I will try to connect my point.
Affection of
What keeps us healthy and happy as we go through life? If you were going to invest now in your future best self, where would you put your time and your energy? There was a recent survey of millennials asking them what their most important life goals were. And over 80% said that a major life goal for them was to get rich. And another 50% of those same young adults said that another major life goal was to become famous. And we're constantly told to lean into work, to push harder, and achieve more. We're given the impression that these are the things that we need to go after in order to have a good life. Pictures of entire lives, of the choices that people make and how those choices work out for them, those pictures are almost impossible to get. Most of what we know about human life, we know from asking people to remember the past. And as we know, hindsight is anything but 20/20. We forget vast amounts of what happens to us in life, and sometimes memory is downright creative. But what if we could watch entire lives as they unfold through time? What if we could study people from the time that they were teenagers all the way into old age to see what really keeps people happy and healthy? We did that. The Harvard study of adult development may be the longest study of adult life that's ever been done. For 75 years, we've tracked the lives of 724 men. Year after year, asking about their work, their home lives, their health, and of course asking all along the way without knowing how their life stories were going to turn out. Studies like this are exceedingly rare. Almost all projects of this kind fall apart within a decade because too many people drop out of the study, or funding for the research dries up, or the researchers get distracted, or they die, and nobody moves the ball further down the field. But through a combination of luck and the persistence of several generations of researchers, this study has survived. About 60 of our original 724 men are still alive, still participating in the study, most of them in their 90s. And we are now beginning to study the more than 2,000 children of these men. And I'm the fourth director of the study. Since 1938, we've tracked the lives of two groups of men. The first group started in the study when they were sophomores at Harvard College. They all finished college during World War II, and then most went off to serve in the war. And the second group that we've followed was a group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods. Boys who were chosen for the study specifically because they were from some of the most troubled and disadvantaged families in the Boston of the 1930s. Most lived in tenements, many without hot and cold running water. When they entered the study, all of these teenagers were interviewed, they were given medical exams. We went to their homes and we interviewed their parents. And then these teenagers grew up into adults who entered all walks of life. They became factory workers and lawyers and bricklayers and doctors, one president of the United States. Some developed alcoholism, a few developed schizophrenia. Some climbed the social ladder from the bottom all the way to the very top, and some made that journey in the opposite direction. The founders of this study would never in their wildest dreams have imagined that I would be standing here today, 75 years later, telling you that the study still continues. Every 2 years, our patient and dedicated research staff calls up our men and asks them if we can send them yet one more set of questions about their lives. Many of the inner city Boston men ask us, why do you keep wanting to study me? My life just isn't that interesting. The Harvard men never ask that question. To get the clearest picture of these lives, we don't just send them questionnaires. We interview them in their living rooms. We get their medical records from their doctors. We draw their blood. We scan their brains. We talk to their children. We videotape them talking with their wives about their deepest concerns. And when about a decade ago we finally asked the wives if they would join us as members of the study, many of the women said, you know, it's about time.
Yes.
So what have we learned? What are the lessons that come from the tens of thousands of pages of information that we've generated on these lives? Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. We've learned 3 big lessons about relationships. The first is that social connections are really good for us and that loneliness kills. It turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, to friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well connected. And the experience of loneliness turns out to be toxic. People who are more isolated than they want to be from others find that they are less happy, their health declines earlier in midlife, their brain functioning declines sooner, and they live shorter lives than people who are not lonely. And the sad fact is that at any given time, more than 1 in 5 Americans will report that they're lonely. And we know that you can be lonely in a crowd and you can be lonely in a marriage. So the second big lesson that we learned is that it's not just the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it's the quality of your close relationships that matters. It turns out that living in the midst of conflict is really bad for our health. High conflict marriages, for example, without much affection, turn out to be very bad for our health, perhaps worse than getting divorced. And living in the midst of good, warm relationships is protective. Once we had followed our men all the way into their 80s, we wanted to look back at them at midlife and to see if we could predict who was going to grow into a happy, healthy octogenarian and who wasn't. And when we gathered together everything we knew about them at age 50, it wasn't their middle-aged cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. The people who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80?
Yeah, I think enough. We got the gist of it. Yeah. So do you see the relationship between compassion and this? So the first finding is that social connection. What lessons they have learned. Of course, they said that the relationship is the predictor of whether you have a happy life or unhappy life.
There's also, I know that study, I love it.
Mm.
It's very important. Altruism,
Mm.
doing for others is also, and the adaptation to like the one in the middle age is put there as well. So it really links.
I see. Yeah. So they said that the first one is the social connection, and then they talk about the loneliness. So if you have compassion, genuine compassion for others, definitely it will foster your social connection. Who doesn't like a compassionate person? And who likes arrogant, angry person? So His Holiness always says that, if you have compassion and really care and concern for others, you will really get a genuine friend. But some of the friends that are just if you have wealth, fame, then they become your friend. And then when you are stripped of all this status, no one is your friend anymore. Whereas if you have compassion, if you are a kind person, if you genuinely help others, then they become your real friend. Whether you have fame or not, they will stick with you. At any time, they will be there to help you. So you can see the compassion, the importance of compassion. Then the second one, what did they say about? The quality of your relationship. If you have compassion, so normally when you cannot have compassion for your partners. That's not true. You can have compassion to your wife, to your husband, to anybody. So if you are compassionate to, let's say, your partner, to your husband, to your wife, to your spouse, whoever, definitely the relationship will improve. Even in one family, if you are compassionate, definitely the environment will be different. But if you are a short-tempered, angry person, very arrogant and all these things, the minute you enter the house, everybody is stripped, becomes strict and tense. And then everybody, whatever they are doing, everything stops. I think you have seen that. I've seen that. There's what you call unease when that person enters. Even though you are just putting up a face, smile and all that, but deep down you are uncomfortable with that person. But we don't feel that towards a compassionate person. So as you don't want to be that person, why not then? Why not? Why not stop being that person? Just try to be, always try to think. So there, of course, later we will discuss about how to develop compassion. But one easy way is about thinking this common humanity. There's nothing a religious belief. It's just that that person is also like me. Just like me, that person also wants happiness, doesn't want to experience unhappiness. So when you have this kind of feeling of what you call common, feeling of oneness, then you tend to become closer. Then with that kind of feeling of closeness, of course your interaction improves. So that's one way to do that. Normally, when I go, especially on campus, I see a young boy and those young people, they are in love, romance. I always make the prayer that after 50 years, let them be in this kind of, love relation. I mean, think when you see people walking before you or all this, so when you make this kind of, let them be happy all day. So it somehow gives you this so much joy, and there's no expense on my part. I just wish them good, wish them happiness. And from my part, I don't have to do anything. Just have to dedicate, just have to wish for them. And I feel so happier, so much happier. So that's one way you can try to do that and experiment. Maybe you will see that, that's quite an easy way to, earn happiness. So that's the reason why I wanted to show you. The relationship, we are social beings. We have to interact with people, whether at home, at office, at workplace, wherever we go. But if you have compassion, then your interaction will be much, much, happier and positive. So now this is what is called the secular view of meaning in life. So what does Buddhist view, what is the Buddhist view of meaning in life? So this is what Lamrim Chenmo says, the heading and subheading. So the first chapter talks about how to rely on your teacher and all this. Then comes the actual part. It says how to train the mind in stages after relying on a teacher. Then there are the two headings. An exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. So this is like urging how to take the essence, how to extract the essence of life. And then how to take full advantage life of leisure and opportunity. Then of course they talk other things. And then when it comes to the actual taking of the essence of life, it goes directly into training the mind in the stages of the path shared with persons of small capacity, medium capacity, and then the great capacity. So this is actually taking the essence is like the final goal is to achieve enlightenment. So as I mentioned earlier, so all this finding meaning in life has something to do with happiness. And happiness, there are different levels. Of course, the highest level of happiness is enlightenment. When you achieve enlightenment, you are free of all sufferings. So that is the highest level of happiness. And then, of course, you have the nirvana, the emancipation from cyclic existence. That's where you are free from the influence of delusions and karma. So that is the second. And then minimum is freedom from lower rebirth. So that is the happiness not being born. Happiness that is exempted of the sufferings that lower beings experience. So we have all these three different. So from the Dhamma point of view, if I put in a simple term, it's like practice Dhamma. Taking essence of our life is to practice Dhamma. As simple as that. We all know that. Most of us, we have attended teachings and all. We know that what is the essence of life, how to live a meaningful life. We know that practicing Dhamma is the only way to live a meaningful life. But then we don't get to do it. Why? Because we don't realize how fortunate we are to have this opportunity. We lack this sense of gratitude. We are very good at taking everything for granted. I read a book and it talks about, I am grateful that nothing happened to me. So when I first saw the title, I was like, why would you be grateful that nothing happened to you? Then I read it and then I understood. That's very, very true. We only feel grateful when something bad happens. When accident happens and when you are alive, oh, I'm so grateful I didn't die. I'm so grateful, nothing bad happens. But when nothing happens, we don't feel good. We don't have this appreciation. So this article is about, I think, one of the hurricane. So it was forecasted that, hurricane is on their way. So they prepared for this impact. And eventually, it changed its course, and it didn't come. So that's why this is about. I'm so grateful nothing happened. While we are sitting here, the roof may collapse. It's not happening. Do we think about that? No. While driving here, accident could have happened. Somebody could have hit you. Did we think about it? No. We are very good at just, everything is taken for granted. And here we come for classes. We just take this, sitting this place for granted. We don't realize what Anthony does before the class. He vacuums every class, before every class. And then we have to move this TV up here. We don't think about it. So that is the problem. And especially when we talk about relationship, you have problem because you don't realize how fortunate you have that person in your life. Only when the person is gone, then you feel sadness and all this. That's too late. At this moment, you must appreciate. You must feel this gratitude. You must reflect. So if we have this sense of gratitude, then definitely we will be able to use whatever that is in a meaningful way. So at the moment, our life, the body that we have achieved, if you think deeply, we are really, really fortunate. But we don't recognize the value. So that's where Lamrim talks about. So this is a quote by Chandra Gomi. Just as a young elephant desiring a mouthful of grass growing at the edge of a deep pit tries to reach it but fails and falls into the abyss. Is it? How do you pronounce abyss? So too we crave the happiness of this life. So when we don't realize the value of this human body or human birth, is it correct to say human birth? Human life.
Human life.
Human life, yeah. Human life. That's when we do this. It's like this elephant. We are wasting this human life just for some trifle gains. Like elephant, just for a mouthful of this grass, he is risking his life to be fallen into that pit, that abyss. So if we are able to recognize the value of our life, only then there is a hope that we will be able to use it properly. So in Lamrim Chenmo, there are three sub-headings. First, identifying the leisures and endowment. And then contemplating on the great importance of the leisures and endowments. And then contemplating on the difficulty of attaining the leisures and endowment. So what does leisure mean? It is not having, we say, our leisure time. In Tibetan, we call it Devo, Delwa. So normally we say, are you free? Tibetan we say, Chona Devo Yimbe. That means, are you free? Then if you are free, we will go to a mall. So likewise, this is, in the literal term, it's like, are you free to practice? Or you have other obligations that kind of prevents you. But Lamrim Chenmo is saying that, yeah, we are free. We are free. But of course, here the free is that we have achieved this freedom from 8 states in which there is no opportunity to practice Dharma. So we are not in that state. We are in the what you call conducive environment. We are not in a state that we cannot practice at all. So what are these? I think you are very familiar. Most of you are very familiar. You must have listened to Lamrim many times. So the first, we have this, what is called the 8 unfavorable conditions. So if you are born in any of these 8 favorable conditions, then you have excuse not to practice. Because these conditions or states are unfavorable. So normally we divide this into 2, for non-human states and human states. So like hell being. If you are born in hell realm, then of course you are 24 hours being kind of tortured. So much pain and suffering. We have hell, a hot hell and cold hell. If you are in hot hell, all the time you are being burned. So imagine we cannot even stand a little bit of fire. If we poke our finger in the fire, we cannot stand that. And imagine if you are being burned, how would a thought to practice Dharma, how a thought to practice Dharma would arise? No way. But we are not. And then hungry ghosts. Constantly suffering from thirst and hunger. Even when in our own life, when we are thirsty and hungry, we don't want to do practice. Oh, I want to eat first, I'm hungry. That's what we will say. But there are 24 hours in search of food. And then animals. Many of you may have your pets. And some pets, of course, they are very clever. They can perform all kinds of tricks. But if you try to teach them one line of Dharma, no, they won't understand at all. They are only concerned about survival. So imagine if you are born as animal. There's no Dharma. This thought to practice wouldn't even arise. They wouldn't even know. And one time I was so shocked. This teenage, she is a teenage girl. So of course she has attended Dharma, not seriously. So I was invited for dinner by the family. So I went there, and then I was chatting with this daughter, and somehow conversation came up to something else, and they said, "Oh, I would very much like to be reborn as tiger." I was so shocked, and I was speechless actually. I couldn't even refute that. It's like, why would a person want to be born in lower ranks? But I think maybe from the daughter's point of view, it's like, oh, there's power, strength, all that, but not deeper reflection. Yeah, so in that sense, we are not born as animal. And then there's something called long-lived God. So this is not human, but it normally is explained as, when you have this only 2 thoughts or awareness. Once you are born in that place, you will have this, oh, I am born in this. That's all awareness. And then you go into this deep sort of meditation. And then, yeah, when the time comes for you to die, at that time there's one awareness. That's all. So you are just kind of drugged. Like a person, if you drug a person, then yeah, be like, there's no awareness, no consciousness, no awareness. Yeah. So these are what is called the 4 non-human states. And sometimes we can be skeptical. We say, oh, where is hell realm, There's no hell realm. Imagine. Even if there's no such thing as cold hell or whatever it is, even if this kind of situation, would you be able to sit and practice? No. And how about this one? People die in fire, get burned. And how about this one? They have specifically designed for these insects to be killed. And this is in Thailand street. All kinds of insects and worms. And these are, live, yeah. They just, boiling oil, they just dip in. So sometimes we wonder, yeah, whether we talk of all this hell and all this, is it maybe it's on the earth itself. And then look at these animals. Just stacked. And one more. But do you see what is wrong with this? Very cute animal. What do you see here? Fear. There's a lot of fear. If you are born as animal, all the time, you have to look out for predators. And I watched documentaries, I think you have also seen. And these deers and all that, they go to drink water in the ponds there, and then there are crocodiles. So these are the non-human, unfavorable states. And even if we are born as human, there's something called remote land, where there is no Dharma. You can imagine, you can tell, even in this world, there are many countries, many places, there's no Dharma. Imagine if you were born in that kind of country, in that kind of land, what would have happened? Your life would be different. But you were not. You were born in a place or country where Dharma is available. Not only Dharma, there are Dharma teachers. You have Dharma centers. And then, even if you are born in the land where there is Dharma, but if you are born with deficient faculties, if you are born, nowadays there are so many disorders. The American Psychiatric Association, they have published the DSM. It's now, I think it's the 5th edition. It's all about disorders. Imagine if you are born with mentally, intellectually challenged, their cognitive impairment. Even if you want to come, and if you are sitting here, and if you are listening to me, you wouldn't understand even one word I'm saying. So we are not born with cognitive deficiencies. And then even if you have full faculties, but if you are born with holding wrong views, some religion believe that, you know, killing animal is practice. And if you are born with a view that, oh, there's no karma, you know, whatever, you know, if I'm able to, in this life, if I cheat other people, it's okay. I'm just being, you know, clever. Of course, strictly speaking, this is when you talk about wrong views, is when you negate the karma and the rituals. But generally, if you have this mistaken view about what is right and what is wrong, that's too bad, because your action is motivated by your views. If you have that kind of wrong view, it is okay to kill people. You will kill people. It is okay to harm others. If you have that kind of view, then you will engage in that kind of action. So we are not. Fortunately, we are not. We have that Dharma. We know what is right and what is wrong. So in that sense, there's reason to have this rejoice. And then time where Buddha has not appeared. So in Buddhism, we talk about this Kalpas, 60 years, and there are different Kalpas, there are what you call the dark Kalpas and dark eons, and light eons. Buddhas only appear in light eons. Even that time, some Buddhas appear or Buddha will come, but not teach. Some Buddha, they teach only one path, like Theravada path. Some teach only Mahayana path. Some teach only Tantrayana path. But we are born in the era of Shakyamuni Buddha, who taught all three. So in that sense, we are very fortunate. But do we really think about this? We don't. So all this is to help us gear towards practicing. When we think how precious this is, then of course you won't let it lose. I think one of the analogy or metaphor used in Lamrim text is that a beggar finding a precious jewel. If he failed to realize that there is a precious jewel, then he will just lose it. But if he realized that there's a precious jewel, then he will really treasure it, and then he can exchange that for money, and then he can solve his situation problem. So likewise, we have found actually a precious jewel, but we don't really realize it. We think that that's just ordinary. Imagine if you are born in this kind of place, this kind of land, constantly living in the fear of fear of bombs, while we are sitting here comfortably. People, they are hiding somewhere in the holes because they fear that any moment a bomb will be dropped on them. So we are not in that kind of situation. We are here sitting comfortably with the air condition on. And then there are countries there people are dying from starvation. We have choices here. Oh, I don't want to eat, no burger. Oh, want to go KFC, or I want to go somewhere else, Chinese or buffet, all this. They don't have choices. Imagine if you are born in this. So this way to really, have this strong sense of, motivation is put yourself in their situation. What would it be? Imagine yourself being born in these situations, and then what would happen? When you try to think that way, then that will kind of give you the energy to really not to waste this opportunity. Then Lamdam also talks about the endowments. So these are more or less same. The 5 personal endowments. Oh, time is already. I'll quickly go through. The first one is being born as human, which we are. Being born in a central land. Central land is where Buddha Dhamma came, and where there is still followers like the bhikshu and bhikshuni and novice. Also there's male and female. All these 4 Sangha communities, if they are still, if they still exist, that's what we call the central land. So we are, in a way. Having all the faculties intact, we have covered that. Not having committed the most extreme negative actions. This is what we call 5 heinous crimes. Do you know about that, yeah? Want to volunteer? Not engaging in the killing of your father, mother, and then killing of Arhat, and then drawing blood from Arhat, and then from Buddha, and then what's the last one? Creating split between Sangha community. So these are considered very heavy negative karma. So we have not done that. We haven't killed our parents. We have not, isn't it? And then having faith in the source. This is having faith in Dhamma. And then 5 endowments that pertain to others. So that is, first one is Buddha has come. Yes, Shakyamuni Buddha has come. Dharma was taught. As I mentioned earlier, some Buddhas come, but they don't teach. So Shakyamuni came, Shakyamuni Buddha came, he also taught. And then the teachings still are surviving. Followers exist. And the feeling of compassion for others exists. This is the support. Those who have families, your family support you to go to class. They are not stopping you from, attending classes, Dharma classes. So we have people who support you in your practice, your friends, your teacher, whoever. All these people support, like center support you. So, in short, we have all these 18 qualities, 18 conducive facilities. Then the second one is contemplating on the great importance of leisure endowments. So now we have identified what are these leisures and endowments. So now, why is it so important? So, I think you have come across what do you call it? The analogy of wish-fulfilling jewel. They said the human life is like this life which is free of this life that is adorned with the leisures and endowments. They said it is akin to wish-fulfilling, more than wish-fulfilling gem, which we talked, I think, last time. One of the first Sunday we talked about how other people are more than wish-fulfilling gem. So now if we use that on this life, so wish-fulfilling gem, it can only provide things for this life. You can ask for big car, big house, money, it will grant you. But it cannot grant you enlightenment, it cannot grant you nirvana, it cannot even guarantee you from optimum human rebirth, your next life. But whereas this life, if you practice, if you really put effort, if you want to ensure not to be born in lower realms, you can do that. This life will enable you to do that. And then even if you want to achieve nirvana, the liberation from samsara, with this body, we can achieve it. And then enlightenment, the real happiness which we talked about, is also to do through this body or through this life. This optimum human birth is possible. We can achieve that. And then even if you want to achieve, because normally enlightenment takes many lives. It says 3 great eons. But if you want to achieve that within one lifetime, through the practice, through the vehicle of Tantrayana, this body can enable. We can achieve that as well. So in that sense, you can see that this body that we have actually is really has great value. But we don't think that way, in that way. So now it's time to really reflect. And then it is so important and so much great value, and if you can find that often, then it's okay. Okay, this life, okay, is okay, I'll just do other things, and then next time when I achieve this kind of birth or this kind of body or life, I can do. You can say that. But it's not easy. So this is the analogy that was given. So you have this turtle, a blind turtle, who dwells most of the time under at the bottom of the sea. You have this huge sea, and then there's this blind turtle who dwells at the bottom of the sea. But every 100 years, he pops up to the surface. And then on the other hand, there's this yoke or the ring is being carried in every direction by this wind and wave. So the question is, what is the chance of this turtle poking its head in the ring? You cannot say it will not. The possibility is there. But the chances are very, very slim. If the turtle pops up all the time, of course, there is a chance. And if he is not blind, there is still a better chance. He can go and look for it. But he's blind. And then if the ring remains at one spot, also there's chance. But the ring is driven everywhere by the waves, by the wave and wind. So that's the analogy, that's the metaphor. So the point is that the ocean is samsara. And that blind turtle is us, sentient beings. Ignorant sentient beings. We are all the time ignorant. Most of us, I would say. We don't see the reality. So it's like blind turtle. And then, like the turtle pops up only, like the turtle remains underwater, at the bottom of the water, most of the time we are born in lower ends. Once in a while, we achieve, like human rebirth. That's like the turtle popping up every 100 years. But then, the ring, the yoke, represents Dharma. But then even if we are born as human being, we don't get to meet Dharma. We are born in a place where there is no Dharma, or we are born in a place where you have no access to Dharma. So that's why it's saying, that is the analogy. But from the common sense also, we know that in Buddhism, everything depends on cause and conditions. Nothing comes about without cause and condition. So if you want to achieve human rebirth, you have to cultivate the causes. So that is normally the virtuous actions. And from our own experience, we can see whether we really cultivate virtuous actions or not. But on the other hand, the causes that bring us to the lower realms are the negative actions. And we know that we are very rich with that. In Lamrim, the analogy was given that the negative actions or the negative karmas is like king's treasure, whereas our positive karma is like the beggar's possession. First of all, beggars do not have much. Even whatever they have are not in good condition. Even if they have a mug, it will be, there's a scratch or there's a dent. Whereas the king's treasure, there is a treasure chest. There's a treasure chest. In there, you have variety, and all are really good qualities. So that's our negative, non-virtuous actions. We have variety. That was actually we can tell from our own practice. So when we sit down to do practice, we are supposedly doing virtuous actions. Imagine if you just do one round of, money recitation. First of all, your motivation, the good intention, motivation is not there. Sometimes there is, sometimes not. And maybe sometimes it's stained by worldly concerns. And then we start, let's say, even if you have a good motivation, if you do that, you start your money. And then around some maybe 10 beats there, and then your mind is already something else, thinking. And then at the end, there's no dedication. So even if when we were doing virtuous actions, we are not doing a quality one. Either it lacks the intention, the motivation, or the actual action. There's something wrong with the dedication. But when it comes to negative actions, let's say if you want to harm somebody, first of all, this strong determination, I want to harm this person. He has been so bad to me. I want to take revenge, whatever it is. And then when you do that, you will really put your heart and mind into it, and you will cause the harm. And then once you finish that, there is satisfaction. Oh, good, I did it. You see, you can tell from this experience that the quality of our virtuous practice is really, really poor, whereas the quality of our negative actions, very good, high quality. So from this, you can tell that the likelihood of being born up there or down. So that is why we're saying that this is the time. We won't be able to achieve that again. While you have it, you better put to good use. That's what it is saying. So at the end, in Lamrim, it suggests 4 ways to extract the essence of this life. Seeing the necessity of practicing the Dharma. So why do we need to practice Dharma? The very simple answer is that because we want happiness. We don't want to experience suffering. So if you want happiness, you have to create its causes, which is to practice Dharma. And then it says, oh yeah, I can see that, there's necessity to practice Dharma. But then, it's not possible, I'm not capable of doing it. So it says, yes, you are capable because you have all that condition. You have these 10 endowments, you are free from all these unfavorable conditions, and you have other facilities. You have shelter, you have food, you have clothes. What else do you need to really practice? So he's saying that yes, you have the capability to accomplishing the practice. You have all the facilities to do that. Then you may say, oh yeah, then this life, I need to do something else. But he's saying that you have to do in this life because this kind of opportunity is hard to come by. And then it says that if you must do it now, right now, because there's something called death, which there's no certain, the certainty is that it will come. It will certainly come. But the time is not certain. It may come any minute. There are stories where, people are well and healthy, goes to sleep, and next morning, gone. So you're saying that if you want to practice, you have to practice now. This is what Viktor Frankl says. Live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now. So that's how we are supposed to extract the essence. And it says that right this minute we have to practice. So our time is up, but just to de-stress. You have seen this, have you?
Yeah.
Who hasn't seen it?
I think I've seen it.
Okay.
Hi, what's your name, darling?
My name is Susan Boyle.
Okay, Susan, and where are you from?
I am from Blackburn near Bathgate, West Lothian.
It's a big town.
It's a sort of collection of villages. How do you think of it?
And how old are you, Susan?
I am 47. And that's just one side of me.
Okay, what's the dream?
I'm trying to be a professional singer.
And why hasn't it worked out so far, Susan?
I've never been given the chance before, but here's hoping it'll change.
Okay, and who would you like to be as successful as?
Elaine Page.
Elaine
something like
Page.
that.
What are you going to sing tonight?
I'm going to sing I Dreamed a Dream from the Miserables.
Okay. Big song.
Yeah? Yeah.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by. When this time life was
Did you expect that, did you? Did you? No.
I dreamed of love that never died.
Thank you very much. Susan Piers.
Without a doubt, that was the biggest surprise I have had in 3 years on the show. When you stood there with that cheeky grin and said, I want to be like Elaine Page, everyone was laughing at you. No one is laughing now. That was stunning. An incredible performance. Amazing. I'm reeling from shock about you two.
I am
Can't
so
believe it.
thrilled because I know that everybody was against you. I honestly think that we were all being very cynical, and I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever. And I just want to say that it was a complete privilege listening to that. It was instant
Susan, I knew the minute you walked out on that stage that we were...
Yeah, what do you think? That's us again, isn't it? We are very quick to judge people. This is where the case of never judge a book by its cover. Okay, so that's all for today. And see whether you can put... Oh yeah, we have question and answer. I forgot about it. Okay, go ahead. Any questions? If no questions, then yeah, we will stop here. And thank you for coming. And yeah, please continue with your practice. So that's important. Yeah, thank you.
Let's say the dedication prayers.
Oh yeah.
We should definitely dedicate the merits
Yes,
of this.
yes, definitely.
Janchu Samcho Rinpoche Make Panang Ke Gyurchi Keba Nyampa Me Pana Kone Gondu Pelwa Sho Jetsu Nami Kutse Rapten Jin Namgar Trinle Chochur Gepadam Ozan Tempe Drome Sasungi Jorwe Muse Tanto Ne Gyurchi Ganri Rawe Korwe Shinkamdi Pendam Dewa Malu Junwene Shinre Siwan Tenzin Yatsui Jape Site Bardu Tengyurchi Champe Pawu Jita Champadam Kotu Zampo Deyam Dejinte Deda Kunji Jesu Dalochin Dewa Deda Tamche Ratu Tusum Shepe Gyawang Tamche Loa Gama Chotu Napadi Ewe Tsawa Di Kunkyam Zampo Cheche Raptu Gowa